There's a particular kind of desperation that comes not from lacking money, but from watching someone you love slip away while you count pennies that will never be enough. Emma Carson knew that desperation intimately as she knelt in the chapel of Queen's General Hospital at 3 in the morning,
We'll get through
her
this
forehead
together.
pressed against clasped hands, her whispered prayer dissolving into the darkness of polished pews and stained glass. The chapel smelled like lemon furniture polish and old hymnals, the scent mixing with something clinical that seeped in from the hallways beyond. Jesus looked down from a window rendered in crimson and cobalt, his glass eyes fixed on some eternal horizon, offering no answers to the 26-year-old librarian who had run out of options somewhere between the billing department's third rejection and the surgeon's final warning. Rose Bennett, 74 years old, and the only mother Emma had truly known, needed $95,000 within 2 weeks. The number had stopped meaning anything 3 days ago when Emma's 7th loan application came back denied. It was just a wall now, insurmountable and absolute, standing between her grandmother and the heart surgery that would keep her alive past autumn. Emma had tried everything. The GoFundMe campaign her coworker set up had crawled to $3,000 before stalling. The jewelry her mother left her, a pearl necklace, 2 gold rings, a bracelet with a broken clasp, had fetched $800 from a pawn shop broker who looked bored by her desperation. The hospital's financial counselor had spoken kindly but firmly about payment plans that required down payments Emma couldn't afford and credit scores she didn't have. So she prayed, not because she expected miracles, but because Rose had taught her that when human strength failed, faith was the last door left to knock on. Her phone buzzed against the pew. Emma lifted her head, blinking away the grit behind her eyelids, and saw Patricia's name on the screen. Her stepmother never called this late. Never called at all unless absolutely necessary, their relationship maintained at the cool distance of mutual politeness since Emma's father died 3 years ago. The chapel felt colder as Emma stepped into the fluorescent bright hallway, answering on the 4th ring. Patricia's voice came through clipped and businesslike, the tone she used when coordinating events for the wealthy clients who hired her company to manage everything from weddings to corporate galas. "I know it's late. Are you at the hospital?" Emma glanced back toward the ICU wing where Rose lay sedated, machines breathing for her until the swelling around her damaged heart valve subsided enough for the surgery she couldn't afford. "Yes? Did something happen?" "I have a solution to your problem. Meet me in the main lobby in 20 minutes. The line went dead before Emma could ask what solution, what problem, what impossible thing Patricia thought could be fixed with a phone call and a midnight meeting. But Emma was already walking, her sneakers squeaking against linoleum, because drowning people didn't question the rope thrown from shore. Patricia arrived exactly 20 minutes later, her silver hair pulled back in the severe bun she wore to work, her pantsuit unwrinkled despite the hour. She carried a leather portfolio and an expression Emma couldn't quite read, calculation mixed with something that might have been sympathy if Patricia were the sympathetic type. They sat in molded plastic chairs near a vending machine, the lobby empty except for a janitor mopping the far end, and a family huddled around coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Patricia opened the portfolio and pulled out a photograph, sliding it across the small table between them. The man in the picture looked defeated. His face was thin, stubbled with several days' growth, and his eyes held the particular exhaustion of someone who had forgotten how to hope. He wore a jacket that had seen better years, and the photo quality was poor, slightly blurred, taken from a distance. His name is Marcus Drake, 30 years old. He was released from prison 6 months ago after serving 3 years for embezzlement. Emma's stomach tightened. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because he needs a wife, and you need money. His family will pay for your grandmother's surgery in exchange for a 6-month marriage contract. The words landed like stones in still water, sending ripples through every certainty Emma thought she had about how the world worked. She looked at the photograph again, at this stranger who apparently needed something from her badly enough to purchase it with her grandmother's life. This is insane. This is business. Patricia pulled out more papers, laying them in a neat row. Marcus comes from wealth, but his family has conditions on his trust fund. Marriage is one of them. You're educated, presentable, and desperate enough to agree to terms that benefit both parties. Emma's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against her thighs, feeling the rough denim of her jeans, grounding herself in something real and solid, while Patricia described a transaction that sounded like it belonged in a different century. Why me? There are thousands of women in New York, millions. Because you need this more than anyone else I know, which means you'll honor the contract. Because my client specifically requested someone outside his social circle, someone genuine, and because, frankly, you don't have any other options. The cruelty of the last statement was almost refreshing in its honesty. Emma looked past Patricia toward the elevator bank that led to the ICU, where Rose lay fighting for every breath while her granddaughter sat in a lobby considering an offer that violated everything Rose had taught her about marriage, faith, and the sanctity of promises made before God. But Rose had also taught her that family came first, always, even before pride, even before principles, even before the version of yourself you wanted to be. I need to meet him first. Patricia nodded as if she'd expected this. He suggested the same thing. Tomorrow, 2:00, Riverside Coffee on 43rd. You talk, you decide, no pressure. Emma almost laughed at the absurdity of no pressure when the clock was counting down to her grandmother's death. Instead, she took the photograph and the small business card Patricia offered, studying the blurred image of Marcus Drake, and wondering what kind of desperation drove a man to purchase a wife like groceries from a stranger's catalog. She went home as dawn broke over Queens, to the studio apartment she could barely afford, where books were stacked against walls because she'd sold her bookshelf months ago. Emma showered, changed, called in sick to the library for the first time in 3 years, and then did what she'd been raised to do when facing impossible choices. She went to church. Crossroads Community Church sat on a corner lot between a laundromat and a bodega, its brick facade weathered but sturdy, its doors always unlocked. Emma had been baptized here at 8 years old, the summer after her parents died in a car accident on the Cross Bronx Expressway. Rose had held her afterward, both of them dripping baptismal water onto the fellowship hall floor, and promised that God had plans even when humans couldn't see them. Emma wasn't sure about God's plans anymore, but she knew the comfort of familiar pews and the way morning light filtered through the single stained glass window Rose had helped fundraise for 20 years ago. Pastor Miller found her there an hour later, sitting alone in the 3rd row, turning the business card over in her hands. He was 72, with kind eyes and the sort of weathered face that came from decades of listening to other people's troubles. He sat down beside her without asking permission, the way he'd done 1,000 times before when she was grieving her parents, struggling through college, learning to navigate a world that felt too large and too hard. Rose is still stable. I called the hospital this morning. Emma nodded, not trusting her voice. But the surgery can't happen without money I don't have. The words came out flat, factual, emptied of the emotion that had been tearing her apart for days. Someone offered to help for a price. She told him everything, the contract, the stranger, the 6 months of her life traded for Rose's chance at survival. Pastor Miller listened without interrupting, his calloused hands folded in his lap, his expression never shifting into judgment or shock. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. The church settled around them with small creaks and sighs, the building breathing in the morning warmth. Is this God's answer? It doesn't feel holy. Sometimes God's answers come through unexpected doors. His voice was gentle but firm. The question isn't whether the door looks like what you prayed for. The question is whether what's on the other side leads you toward light or darkness. Test the spirit, Emma. Meet this man. Listen to what your heart tells you and pray before you sign anything. She met Marcus Drake at Riverside Coffee the next afternoon, arriving 15 minutes early to claim a corner table and rehearse the questions she'd written on her phone during a sleepless night. The cafe was small, crowded with the lunch rush beginning to thin, smelling of espresso and the sandwiches warming in a display case by the register. Emma ordered regular coffee she didn't drink and watched the door, jumping slightly every time it opened. She'd studied the photograph so many times she could map every hollow in his face, every shadow under his eyes. She'd imagined a man who moved like defeat, shoulders curved inward, gaze fixed on the ground. The man who walked through the door at exactly 2 o'clock was not that person. He was tall, she registered that first, easily over 6 feet, with dark hair cut with precision and a jaw that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood geometry. He wore a navy suit that fit him the way expensive things did, tailored to his frame, moving with him as he scanned the cafe. His watch caught light from the window, probably worth more than Emma made in 6 months. Their eyes met. He smiled just slightly and crossed toward her table with the confidence of someone who had never questioned whether he belonged in a room. Emma's first coherent thought was, "This man is not who Patricia described." Her second thought, sharp and immediate, was, "I've been lied to." He extended his hand as he reached her table. "Emma Carson?" "You're not him." The words came out before she could stop them. "The photo Patricia showed me, that's not you." Something flickered across his face, too quick to name, and then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat without waiting for invitation. Up close, she could see his eyes were deep brown, almost black in the cafe's interior light, and his hands, while elegant, showed recent calluses along the fingertips. "That was me 6 months ago. The day I left Rikers Island. I've since regained my footing." Emma's mind raced through implications. Prison changed people. She knew that intellectually. But this transformation felt like more than weight gained back and a good barber. This felt like 2 different men wearing the same name. Why did Patricia show me that photo instead of a current one? I gave her that photo. I wanted you to see where I'd been, not just where I am now. He ordered coffee when the waitress appeared, black with nothing added, and then turned his full attention back to Emma. "I don't want to trick you into anything. The worst prisons aren't made of bars. They're made of the walls we build after we've been hurt enough times. I'm trying not to build any more walls." The words settled between them, unexpected and raw. Emma studied his face, looking for deception or manipulation, but found only a kind of weary honesty that felt genuine in ways she couldn't quite articulate. "Patricia said you were in for embezzlement. 3 years. "Yes, and you need to get married because your family has conditions on a trust fund." "That's partially accurate. I need to be married by my 30th birthday, which is in 4 weeks, to access certain family business responsibilities. The trust fund is separate, but marriage was written into my father's succession plan while I was incarcerated." Emma pulled out her notebook, the one where she'd written 17 questions. She flipped to the first page. "I have conditions before I'll even consider this." He leaned back, and for the first time since sitting down, something like surprise crossed his features. "Go ahead." "The money transfers directly to Queens General Hospital, not through me. I want 0 access to it, so there's no question of fraud or misuse." "Agreed." "I meet your family before signing anything. I need to know who I'm dealing with." "I was going to suggest that myself." "Independent lawyer reviews the contract. Someone I choose, not someone you provide." Fair. I'll pay their fees. We attend church together at least once. I need to see how you act in that environment. He paused at this one, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. Which church? Mine. Crossroads Community in Queens. I'll be there. Any Sunday you choose. And separate bedrooms. No physical expectations. This is a business arrangement, nothing else. I already planned on that. I'll take the smaller room. Emma had expected resistance, negotiation, the slow, grinding process of compromise. Instead, Marcus agreed to every condition without hesitation, which somehow made her more suspicious rather than less. Why is this so easy for you? Because I've been in situations where I had no control, no choice, no dignity. I won't put anyone else in that position, especially not someone doing me a favor. He set his cup down carefully, the small ceramic sound sharp in the cafe's ambient noise. I have a request, though. Not a condition, just something I'd like to do, if you're comfortable with it. What? Patricia mentioned you volunteer at your church and love books. She said you live in a small apartment and need a bookshelf. I'd like to build you one. I've been learning woodworking. It helps me think, gives my hands something to do that isn't destructive. Emma blinked, completely thrown by the shift from contract negotiations to furniture. You want to build me a bookshelf? If you'll let me. I like working with wood. It calms me in ways nothing else has since I got out. She should have said no. Should have kept the boundary clear between business and anything personal. But something in his voice when he said, "calms me," reminded her of the way she felt shelving books at the library, the meditation of alphabetical order, and the weight of stories in her hands. How would you even know what I need? Patricia said you mentioned it to her once, but I could come by, take measurements, ask what you like. Or not. The offer stands regardless of whether you accept the contract. The waitress returned to refill Emma's untouched coffee. A group of college students claimed the table next to theirs, laughing about something on someone's phone. Normal life continued around them, while Emma sat across from a convicted felon, offering to build her furniture in exchange for 6 months of marriage. I need to think about all of this. It's not a decision I can make in a coffee shop. I understand. He pulled a folder from the messenger bag he'd set beside his chair. This is everything Patricia probably didn't give you. My full criminal record, details about my family's business, the reasons behind the marriage clause, and references from my parole officer and the volunteer program where I work with ex-offenders learning to read. Emma took the folder, surprised by its weight. You volunteer? Tuesdays and Thursdays at a literacy center in Brooklyn. Most of the people there are like me, made bad choices, paid for them, trying to figure out who they are on the other side of consequences. She opened the folder enough to see the first page, a court document, official and detailed, listing charges and sentencing. Below that, what looked like a business prospectus. Below that, letters on official letterhead. Why did you really do it? The embezzlement. His expression closed slightly, not hostile, but guarded. That's in the file. But the short version is, I made choices that hurt people I cared about. I'm trying to make different choices now. It wasn't an answer, not really, but Emma recognized the shape of secrets too painful to speak aloud. She had her own. The night her parents died, she'd been angry at them for missing her school play, had refused to hug her father goodbye, carried that last moment of childish stubbornness like a stone in her chest for 18 years. If I agree to meet your family, when would that be? Tomorrow, if you're available. I know time is critical with your grandmother's surgery. The mention of Rose brought everything back into sharp focus. Emma wasn't sitting in a cafe making a new friend. She was negotiating terms for selling 6 months of her life to save the person who had raised her from grief and given her every good thing she knew about love and faith and perseverance. Where did they live? Westchester. I can pick you up, or you can drive yourself. Whatever makes you comfortable. Westchester meant money, real money, the kind that bought houses with multiple wings and gardeners who knew Latin names for roses. Emma had cleaned houses there one summer during college, scrubbing toilets for families who left tips in envelopes by the door and never quite looked at her face. I'll drive myself, just send me the address. They exchanged numbers. Marcus paid for both coffees despite Emma's protest, and then they stood awkwardly by the door. Two strangers bound together by desperation and circumstance, neither quite knowing how to end the conversation. I meant what I said about the bookshelf. Even if you decide this isn't right for you, I'd still like to build it. Emma adjusted her purse strap, buying time to process the oddness of the offer. Why? Because you're doing something brave by even considering this, because your grandmother is lucky to have someone who loves her this much, and because I need to believe I'm capable of building good things, not just breaking them. He left first, pushing through the glass door into afternoon sunlight, and Emma watched him walk away with the kind of purposeful stride that came from always knowing exactly where you were going. She sat back down, pulled out the folder, and began to read. The criminal record was straightforward. Embezzlement of $300,000 from Morrison and Associates law firm. Guilty plea. 3 years minimum security at Rikers Island. Released 6 months early for good behavior. No prior arrests, no violence, no indication of what had driven a man from apparent privilege into a felony conviction. The business documents were harder to parse. References to Drake Industries, real estate holdings, investment portfolios, numbers that made Emma's head spin. Nothing suggested the kind of wealth that required mansions in Westchester, but comfortable certainly, successful, the kind of family that could afford to pay for a surgery without blinking. But one detail snagged her attention. Morrison and Associates law firm, where the embezzlement occurred, had employed someone named David Drake as a junior associate during the same time period. The name appeared in a footnote, easy to miss unless you were looking for inconsistencies. Emma pulled out her phone and searched David Drake Morrison Associates. The results were sparse. Law firms didn't advertise their junior employees, and the embezzlement scandal had been buried in business news sections years ago. But LinkedIn gave her one hit. David Drake, currently listed as family attorney for Drake Industries, previously employed at Morrison and Associates from 2020 to 2021. The timeline aligned perfectly. David working at the firm, money going missing, Marcus taking the fall. Emma closed her laptop and pressed her fingers against her temples where a headache was beginning to build. Either this was an extraordinary coincidence, or Marcus had gone to prison for someone else's crime. And if it was the latter, what kind of man sacrificed 3 years of his life for another person? She thought about Pastor Miller's words, test the spirit. Figure out if this leads toward light or darkness. Then she thought about Rose, tubes running into her arms, machines breathing for her, time running out in increments measured by failing heartbeats. Emma called the number Marcus had given her. He answered on the second ring. Tomorrow works. What time should I be there? That night, Emma sat by Rose's hospital bed after visiting hours, holding her grandmother's hand while night shift nurses moved through their rounds with quiet efficiency. Rose was awake, groggy from medication, but alert enough to know her granddaughter's face. You look troubled, baby. Emma told her everything. Not because she expected approval, but because lying to Rose had never been possible, even when Emma desperately wanted to. The old woman listened without interrupting, her breathing labored but steady, her eyes sharp despite the morphine dulling her pain. When Emma finished, Rose was quiet for a long time. Monitors beeped their rhythms. Someone laughed at the nurse's station down the hall. This man. You trust him? I don't know him well enough to trust him. But your gut, what does it say? Emma thought about Marcus's hands, the calluses suggesting real work, the way he'd agreed to every condition without negotiation. The folder of documents he'd handed over like transparency was automatic rather than earned. The reference to prisons made of walls instead of bars. My gut says he's hiding something, but also that he's not cruel. Those two things can be true at the same time. Rose squeezed her hand with what little strength she had. Your grandfather hid things from me. Took me 5 years to learn he'd been married before, lost a baby with his first wife. Thought I'd leave him if I knew he came with that much grief. But hiding something isn't the same as being dishonest about who you are at the core. How do I tell the difference? You watch what someone does when they don't have to do anything, when there's nothing in it for them. That's when you see character. Emma drove to Westchester the next afternoon, following GPS directions through increasingly wealthy neighborhoods until she turned onto a private drive that wound through manicured grounds. The house that appeared around a curve of oak trees made her breath catch. 3 stories of colonial architecture, windows that gleamed in afternoon light, gardens that probably required a full-time staff. This wasn't comfortable success. This was generational wealth, the kind that built wings onto buildings and had portraits in the foyer. Marcus met her in the circular driveway before she'd even fully parked, his expression careful and slightly nervous. He wore khakis and a button-down shirt, dressed down from yesterday's suit but still perfectly pressed. I should have prepared you better. The house is intimidating. Emma got out of her 12-year-old Honda, acutely aware of the rust spot near the rear wheel well and the way her jeans had worn thin at the knees. You said your family was in real estate. We are. This property has been in the family for 40 years. My grandmother bought it. Your grandmother bought a mansion? My grandmother had excellent business instincts and no patience for false modesty. He offered a slight smile. Come inside. They're nervous to meet you, which makes them overly formal. Just be yourself. The front door opened before they reached it, revealing a woman in her mid-50s, wearing a dress that probably cost more than Emma's monthly rent. Her hair was pulled back in a style that looked effortless, but certainly wasn't, and her smile seemed genuine, despite the obvious appraisal happening behind her eyes. Emma, come in, sweetheart. We've heard so much about you. Marcus made introductions as they entered a foyer with marble floors and a chandelier that threw prismatic light across walls hung with oil paintings. Catherine Drake, Marcus's aunt, who managed the family's charitable foundation. William Drake, Marcus's father, a stern-looking man in his 60s who shook Emma's hand with formal precision. David Drake, younger than Marcus by a few years, who couldn't quite meet Emma's eyes. The last detail confirmed her suspicion. David was hiding something, and Marcus was protecting him. They gathered in a dining room that could have seated 20, though only 6 places were set at one end of a table that gleamed with polish. 2 additional people joined them, Aunt Helen, Catherine's older sister, and a couple introduced as Greta and Jorge, the cook and groundskeeper, who were apparently considered family enough to dine with them. William said grace, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed. The prayer was long, traditional, thanking God for provision and family and the opportunity to welcome a new member into their home. Emma kept her eyes closed and her hands folded, but her mind raced with questions about what kind of family included household staff at dinner and lived in houses that required maps. The meal was formal but not cold. Catherine asked about Emma's work at the library, seemed genuinely interested in literacy programs and budget constraints. William wanted to know about her education, her childhood, the values Rose had instilled. David barely spoke, pushing food around his plate with the distracted air of someone who wished he were anywhere else. Your grandmother raised you alone after your parents passed? Helen's voice was kind, not prying. Yes, ma'am. I was 8 when they died. Rose took me in without hesitation, even though she was already in her 50s and looking forward to retirement. That's beautiful. Catherine dabbed her mouth with a linen napkin. Sacrifice for family. That's what builds character. Emma caught Marcus watching her from across the table, his expression unreadable. She wondered if his aunt knew about the sacrifice he'd made, the 3 years in prison covering for the brother who sat 2 seats away, looking progressively more uncomfortable. After dinner, Catherine insisted on showing Emma the gardens, while Marcus was pulled into William's study for what was described as quick business. Emma walked beside the older woman along paths lined with roses just beginning their summer bloom, the evening air thick with their scent and the sound of distant traffic muted by acres of trees. I need to ask you something directly. Catherine stopped by a fountain, its water catching the last of the sunlight. Do you care about Marcus, or is this purely transactional for you? Emma had prepared for this question, had scripted an answer that would satisfy without committing to feelings she didn't have. But standing in this garden, surrounded by wealth she couldn't fathom, looking at a woman who clearly loved her nephew despite whatever complicated history lay between them, the script felt dishonest. I need the money for my grandmother's surgery. That's why I'm here. But your nephew has been kinder and more transparent than I expected. I don't know him well enough to care about him yet, but I don't dislike him, which feels important. Catherine smiled, the expression transforming her face from elegant to warm. Honest. Good. Marcus has had enough people lie to him out of politeness or fear. He needs someone who'll tell him the truth, even when it's uncomfortable. The embezzlement, Emma started, then stopped, unsure how to phrase the question, was complicated, and not entirely what it seemed. But that's Marcus's story to tell, not mine. Catherine touched Emma's arm lightly. What I can tell you is that my nephew is the most loyal person I know, sometimes to his own detriment. He'll put everyone else first and himself last, which makes him either a saint or a fool, depending on your perspective. They walked back toward the house as twilight deepened into darkness, lights clicking on along the path with automated precision. Through the windows, Emma could see Marcus and William in the study, their conversation animated, William gesturing while Marcus listened with his arms crossed. He's arguing with his father about including you in tomorrow's church service. Catherine's voice was amused. William thinks it's too soon. Marcus insists on honoring your condition about attending together. Emma stopped walking. I didn't mean this Sunday. I just meant eventually. Marcus takes commitments seriously, even conditional ones, especially those. Inside, the conversation concluded with William shaking his head, but not looking angry, and Marcus emerging from the study with the air of someone who had won a battle but wasn't celebrating the victory. He found Emma in the foyer, where she'd been studying a portrait of an older woman with fierce eyes and Marcus's jawline. My grandmother, she built Drake Industries from a single apartment building in the Bronx. Died when I was 15. She looks formidable. She was. Also the kindest person I've ever known. She used to say that strength without kindness is just cruelty in disguise, and kindness without strength is just wishful thinking. Emma's phone buzzed. The hospital. Her heart stopped as she answered, Marcus's attention immediately sharpening on her face. Dr. Ramirez's voice was calm but urgent. Miss Carson, you need to come. Your grandmother coded 20 minutes ago. We stabilized her, but the situation has changed. We need to schedule surgery within the next 10 days or the risks increase exponentially. Emma's vision narrowed to a point. 10 days. Less than 2 weeks. The timeline had just collapsed from already impossible to absurd. I'll be there in 30 minutes. She hung up and looked at Marcus, who was already pulling car keys from his pocket. I heard. I'll drive you. Your hands are shaking too hard. The ride to Queens General happened in fragments of awareness. The smooth interior of Marcus's car, so unlike her rattling Honda. The way he drove with confident efficiency through evening traffic. The silence that felt respectful rather than awkward. Emma's mind spun through calculations she'd already done 1,000 times, arriving at the same impossible conclusion. She couldn't get $95,000 in 10 days through any legal means available to her unless she signed the contract. Marcus pulled up to the hospital entrance. "I'll park and wait in the lobby. Take whatever time you need." Emma almost told him to go home, that he'd done enough by providing transportation. But the thought of walking back through those hospital corridors alone, of sitting by Rose's bedside, counting down hours until another crisis, felt suddenly unbearable. "Thank you." Rose was awake when Emma entered the ICU, propped up on pillows that seemed to swallow her diminishing frame. Her color was better than it had been, but Emma could see the toll each crisis took, the way her grandmother seemed to be fading incrementally, becoming less solid with each passing day. "They called you." Rose's voice was thread-thin, but steady. "I told them not to worry you." "Grandma, you coded. Of course they called me." "Happens all the time in here. Watch the monitors long enough, you'll see everyone's hearts stutter a bit." Emma pulled a chair close, taking Rose's hand carefully around the IV line. "Dr. Ramirez says surgery needs to happen within 10 days now. And do you have $95,000 I don't know about?" "I'm working on it." Rose's eyes, still sharp despite everything, searched Emma's face. "You met the boy's family today?" "I did." "And?" "They live in a mansion, an actual mansion with wings and gardens and staff." Marcus didn't mention that level of wealth. "Does that change your answer?" Emma thought about Catherine's warmth, William's formal grace, the way David couldn't meet her eyes, about Marcus agreeing to every condition, offering to build her furniture, driving her to the hospital without being asked, about the folder of documents and the mystery of embezzlement that didn't add up, and the prison time that felt like sacrifice rather than punishment. "I think he went to jail for his brother. I think David took the money and Marcus took the blame." "That's quite an assumption." "David worked at the same law firm where the embezzlement happened, same time period. He can barely look at me, and Marcus gets tense whenever David's mentioned. It's the only thing that makes sense." Rose was quiet, her breathing labored but rhythmic. "If that's true, what kind of man does that make him?" "Either incredibly loyal or incredibly stupid." "Or both." Rose squeezed Emma's hand. "Baby girl, I need you to listen to me carefully. I'm 74 years old. I've lived a full life. I held you when you were born. I buried your parents. I watched you grow into someone I'm proud to call family. If my time is up—" "Don't," Emma's voice broke. "Don't say that." "If my time is up, I'll meet Jesus with peace in my heart, knowing you're going to be fine. But if there's a chance to stay, if this boy and his family can give us that chance, I want you to take it. Not for me, for you. Because you need to learn something I should have taught you years ago." "What's that?" "That accepting help isn't weakness. That we were never meant to carry everything alone. That sometimes God's answers look nothing like what we prayed for, but they're still answers." Emma stayed until Rose fell asleep, then made her way to the lobby where Marcus sat reading something on his phone, his expression troubled. He looked up when she approached, standing immediately. "How is she?" "Stable, scared, trying not to show it. Like her granddaughter." The observation was gentle but accurate. Emma sank into the chair beside him, exhausted in ways that went beyond physical tiredness. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest, even if the answer costs you this arrangement." Marcus set his phone aside, giving her his complete attention. Did you go to prison for David? His face went carefully blank, the kind of emptiness that came from practice hiding reactions. Why would you think that? Because he worked at Morrison & Associates during the embezzlement. Because he can't look at me without guilt. Because you get tense when his name comes up. Because you said you protected someone you cared about by taking blame for their mistakes. Marcus was quiet for a long time. The hospital sounds filtered around them, codes called over intercoms, families having quiet conversations, the squeak of gurneys on linoleum. I can't talk about that. Not because I don't want to be honest with you, but because telling you makes you complicit in a lie my father can't ever know about. It would destroy him, destroy David, destroy everything I went to prison to protect. So it's true. I didn't confirm that. You didn't deny it either. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped between them. What I can tell you is this. I made choices that hurt people I loved. I'm trying to make different choices now, better ones. And I will never ask you to lie for me or participate in deception that harms anyone. Our contract is separate from my family's complicated history. Emma studied his profile in the harsh fluorescent light, seeing the exhaustion lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. This was a man carrying weight he'd chosen to lift, probably alone, probably for years. I want to sign the contract. His head snapped toward her. You're sure? No. But I'm out of time and options. And despite everything confusing about you, I don't think you're cruel. Rose said to watch what people do when they don't have to do anything. You drove me here tonight. You offered to build me a bookshelf before knowing I'd agree to marry you. You've been honest about everything, except the one secret that would destroy your family if revealed. That's not manipulation. That's just human. I'll have David draw up the paperwork tomorrow. We can sign as soon as your lawyer reviews it. I don't have a lawyer. Then I'll pay for one. Someone you choose, someone who has only your interests in mind. He pulled out his phone, typing quickly. Transfer of funds happens immediately upon signing. Hospital gets payment, surgery gets scheduled. 6 months from then, we file for quiet divorce, and you're free. And you get whatever family business responsibility requires you to be married. Yes. What happens at the end of 6 months? To your father's succession plan? Honestly, I don't know. I'm hoping 6 months is enough time to prove I'm capable of leading Drake Industries without needing marital status as evidence of maturity. If not, I'll figure something else out. Emma's phone buzzed again. A text from the hospital billing department, even at this hour, reminding her of the outstanding balance and the surgery that couldn't proceed without payment guarantees. She showed Marcus the screen. How fast can this happen? If you're willing to do a courthouse wedding for the legal part, we could be married by Friday. Then we can have a proper ceremony later if you want, for your church family and grandmother. The speed of it all should have terrified her. Instead, Emma felt the strange calm of someone who had been drowning and finally stopped fighting the current. Maybe this was surrender, or maybe it was faith. Maybe there was no difference. Friday works, but I have new conditions. Tell me. We do the church ceremony within the 6 months. Real vows, in front of Pastor Miller and my community. I won't have people thinking I sold myself without God's blessing. Agreed. And you tell me the truth about David and the embezzlement before we sign the final divorce papers. No lies between us when we end this, even if we started with them. Marcus hesitated at this one, conflict clear on his face. If I tell you, you'll understand why I can never tell my father, and you'll have to live with knowing something that could devastate people I love. I know, but I need to know who I married, even if it's only for 6 months. I need the whole truth eventually. He extended his hand. Deal. But not before the 6 months are up. I need that time to figure out how to explain it without making you complicit in the lie. They shook on it, and Emma felt the calluses on his fingertips, evidence of the woodworking he'd mentioned. Real work done with his hands, building instead of destroying. Rose was right. You learned character by watching what people did when they didn't have to do anything. Marcus was building her a bookshelf. He'd driven her to the hospital. He'd agreed to church attendance and separate rooms and lawyers who worked only for her interests. He was protecting his brother at cost to himself, hiding in plain sight behind a criminal record that wasn't entirely his. Emma didn't love him, didn't even know him beyond a handful of conversations and the shape of his secrets. But she thought maybe, possibly, she could learn to respect him. And respect was a foundation you could build on, even if the structure was only meant to stand for half a year. David arrived at Emma's apartment the next morning with contracts, a lawyer named Jennifer Martinez, who specialized in family law, and an apologetic expression that suggested he knew exactly how irregular this entire situation was. They sat at Emma's tiny kitchen table, the only table she owned, while Jennifer walked through every clause with meticulous care. The terms were straightforward. Marriage duration, 6 months from date of legal ceremony. Emma received $95,000 transferred directly to Queens General Hospital for Rose Bennett's medical care. Marcus received marital status required for family business succession. Both parties agreed to attend family functions together, present a united front publicly, and maintain separate residences or separate rooms if cohabitating. No expectation of physical intimacy. Either party could terminate early if the other violated terms of respect, honesty in interactions, or put the other in legal or physical danger. Emma read each page twice, Jennifer explaining implications of community property law and the prenuptial agreement that accompanied the contract. Marcus had waived all financial claims against Emma. She had no access to his accounts, no stake in Drake Industries, no right to anything beyond the agreed-upon payment for Rose's surgery. This is unusually one-sided. Jennifer looked up from the documents. You're getting very little protection here, Marcus. Emma isn't trying to take advantage of me. She's trying to save her grandmother. I don't need protection from that. Still, if this were a typical prenup negotiation, I'd advise my client to ask for more. Emma set down the papers. I don't want more. I want my grandmother alive and healthy. That's the only thing I came here for. Jennifer made notes, suggested minor language changes that strengthened Emma's position, and then declared the contract fair, if unusual. They signed in triplicate, David notarizing with practiced efficiency, and then Marcus opened his phone and transferred $95,000 with a few taps that seemed absurdly simple for such a massive amount. Emma's phone chimed confirmation from the hospital 30 seconds later. Payment received. Surgery scheduled for the following Tuesday. She stared at the screen, reading the words over and over until they stopped meaning anything except that Rose was going to live. Her grandmother was going to survive past autumn, past winter, maybe past many more seasons than either of them had dared to hope for 3 days ago. Thank you. Her voice came out rough, choked with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. I don't know how to thank you enough. Marcus shook his head. You're giving me something equally valuable. Let's call it even. The courthouse ceremony happened on Friday afternoon with David and Jennifer as witnesses, the whole process taking less than 30 minutes. Judge Morrison, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, recited vows from a binder and declared them legally married, with all the ceremony of someone processing parking violations. Emma wore a simple blue dress she'd bought for a library fundraiser 3 years ago. Marcus wore the same suit from their first meeting. They exchanged plain gold bands purchased from a jewelry store in the courthouse building. When Judge Morrison told Marcus he could kiss his bride, He looked at Emma with a question in his eyes. She nodded, just barely, and he leaned in to press a brief, chaste kiss against her lips that felt more like a signature than affection. "Congratulations," Judge Morrison said without inflection, already reaching for the next file on her desk. They walked out of the courthouse into September sunshine as husband and wife, legal strangers bound by contracts and desperation. And Emma thought about Rose's words regarding God's answers coming through unexpected doors. This door had led somewhere she never could have anticipated. Whether it led toward light or darkness, she'd know soon enough. Rose's surgery happened on Tuesday morning, 8 hours of delicate work that Dr. Ramirez described afterward as complicated but successful. Emma spent those hours in the surgical waiting room with Marcus, who had appeared without being asked and sat with her through every terrible minute. He brought coffee she didn't drink and sandwiches she couldn't eat, read quietly while she paced, and never once suggested she should calm down or relax or have faith that everything would be fine. When Dr. Ramirez finally emerged, still in surgical scrubs, to say that Rose was in recovery and the prognosis was excellent, Emma collapsed into Marcus's arms and sobbed against his expensive shirt while he held her with surprising gentleness and murmured that it was okay. She could let go now. Everything was going to be okay. She moved into the Drake mansion the following weekend with a single suitcase and a box of books, leaving her apartment to a subletter and her old life to a past that already felt distant. Marcus gave her the third-floor suite as promised, a space larger than her entire previous apartment, with a sitting room and bedroom and bathroom that had heated floors and a tub deep enough to drown in. His room was down the hall, small and spare, furnished with a single bed and a desk covered in woodworking sketches. Emma saw it only once when Catherine was showing her around, and was struck by how little space Marcus claimed in this enormous house despite being family. Catherine explained the household schedule over tea in a sunroom that overlooked the gardens. Family dinners every night at 7, Grace before meals, William presiding. Church on Sundays at Westchester Community Fellowship, though Emma was welcome to attend her own church if she preferred. Bible study for the women on Thursday evenings. Casual dress during the week, formal for family functions and business dinners. It's a lot of structure. Catherine's tone was apologetic. William runs the family like he runs the business, organized, traditional, scheduled. But there's warmth underneath the formality. You'll see. Emma settled into routines she had to learn. Which fork to use for which course, how to make small talk with William's business associates, the art of being present without being intrusive. Marcus navigated it all with practiced ease, clearly having grown up in this world of mannered wealth and unspoken expectations. But every night, after dinner and whatever family gathering happened in the library or screening room or billiard room, Marcus would disappear into the garage workshop, and every night, Emma could hear the sound of sanding and sawing floating up through the old house's ventilation, rhythmic and meditative. On her 10th day in the mansion, Marcus appeared at breakfast with sawdust in his hair and satisfaction in his expression. "Your bookshelf is done. Can I bring it over to your grandmother's house this afternoon?" They transported it in his car, assembling it in Rose's living room while the old woman directed from her recliner, already home from the hospital and recovering faster than anyone had predicted. The bookshelf was beautiful. Cherry wood with clean minds and adjustable shelves, a small drawer perfect for bookmarks, and carved into one corner, almost hidden, the initials E.C. Emma ran her fingers over the wood, feeling the smoothness of sanding and the slight imperfections that marked handmade work. It's perfect. Corners are a little uneven, and the stain didn't take quite evenly on the back panel. It's perfect, Emma repeated, meeting his eyes. Thank you. Rose watched them from her chair, her expression knowing and soft. You're a good man, Marcus Drake. I'm glad my granddaughter found you. Marcus's smile was genuine but complicated. I'm trying to be worthy of that assessment, Mrs. Bennet. After they left Rose's house and drove back toward Westchester, Emma found herself studying Marcus's profile in the car's dim interior light. He'd sacrificed his freedom for his brother, built furniture with his hands, sat with her through 8 hours of surgery, agreed to every condition she'd set without negotiation. She didn't love him, but she thought maybe she was beginning to understand him, which felt like its own kind of foundation. And foundations were how you built something lasting, even if the structure was only meant to stand for 6 months. The mansion's lights glowed against the darkness as they pulled into the driveway. Home, Emma thought experimentally, testing the word against this place she barely knew. Not home yet, maybe never home, but shelter at least. A place to rest while she figured out what came next. Marcus cut the engine and turned to her. Are you okay? I know this is all overwhelming. I'm okay. Better than okay, actually. Rose is alive and healing. That's everything. Still, you gave up a lot for this arrangement. Your apartment, your independence, your normal life. And you gave up $95,000 and your freedom to marry whoever you actually wanted. I wanted to marry someone real, someone genuine. I got that. The words hung between them, intimate in ways that made Emma's chest tighten. She reached for the door handle, needing air and distance and time to process the strange tenderness in his voice. I should go to bed. Early shift at the library tomorrow. Emma. He caught her hand, gentle but firm. If this gets to be too much, if you need space or want to renegotiate terms, just tell me. I don't want you to feel trapped. She looked down at their joined hands, his calloused fingers against her smaller ones. I'll remember that. Thank you. That night, lying in a bed too large for one person, in a room decorated by someone else's aesthetic choices, Emma thought about prisons made of walls instead of bars, about the ways people trapped themselves in sacrifice and secrecy, and the weight of protecting others, about how Marcus had chosen this particular prison willingly, repeatedly, in service of something he believed was worth the cost. She fell asleep thinking about bookshelf corners that didn't quite match, and imperfect staining on wood worked by hands that were learning to build instead of break. The first Sunday after Rose's surgery, Marcus appeared outside Emma's suite wearing khakis and a button-down shirt that looked deliberately casual. His usual polished appearance softened into something almost approachable. He drove them to Crossroads Community Church in Queens, the drive taking 40 minutes through morning traffic, while Emma mentally prepared herself for the collision of her two worlds. The church parking lot was half full when they arrived, and Emma could see Mrs. Chen setting up coffee in the fellowship hall through the side window, could hear the organist practicing scales that echoed from the sanctuary. This building held every Sunday of her childhood, every Christmas pageant and Easter service, every moment of grief and growth since her parents died. Bringing Marcus here felt like introducing him to her soul. Pastor Miller met them at the door, his weathered face creasing into genuine warmth as he shook Marcus's hand. Welcome. Emma speaks highly of you, which is rare enough that I pay attention. They sat in the third pew, where Emma had always sat with Rose, and the absence of her grandmother beside her felt sharp until Marcus leaned slightly closer and whispered that Rose would be back here soon, stronger than ever. The service opened with hymns Emma knew by heart, and she noticed Marcus singing along in a clear baritone, his voice confident on harmonies that suggested real familiarity with church music. Pastor Miller's sermon focused on second chances and redemption, the kind of providence Emma had stopped believing in when it came to her own life. He spoke about the prodigal son returning home, about communities that chose grace over judgment, about the radical notion that people could become someone new without erasing who they'd been. We love redemption stories because we all need redeeming. Every single one of us has something we'd undo if we could, some choice we'd remake, some word we'd swallow back down. The question isn't whether we need second chances, it's whether we have the courage to take them when they're offered. Marcus's posture shifted slightly, tension threading through his shoulders. Emma glanced at him and saw something raw in his expression before he noticed her attention and smoothed his features back into neutrality. After the service, the congregation moved with practiced efficiency toward the fellowship hall for coffee and the potluck brunch that happened first Sunday of every month. Emma introduced Marcus to Mrs. Chen, who studied him with sharp eyes before declaring him too thin and piling a plate with homemade dumplings. Mr. Patterson wanted to know about Marcus's work, which led to careful explanations about Drake Industries' real estate holdings that sounded legitimate but vague. Linda from Bible study pulled Emma aside while Marcus was occupied with the church treasurer discussing building maintenance funds. "He's handsome. Is he kind?" Emma thought about surgical waiting rooms and handmade furniture and agreements honored without negotiation. "Yes, I think so." "That's good. Handsome fades, but kind lasts. Your grandmother would approve." Pastor Miller caught them before they left, asking Marcus if he'd be interested in the men's Bible study that met Thursday mornings at 6. Marcus agreed without hesitation, which surprised Emma. 6 in the morning was early, even for people who didn't keep the late hours Marcus seemed to prefer in his workshop. On the drive back to Westchester, Emma's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine, asking if they'd like to attend Thursday evening Bible study at the Drake family's church. Emma agreed, then realized she just committed them to 2 weekly Bible studies in addition to Sunday services. "You don't have to go to both. I know you agreed to church, not religious immersion." Marcus kept his eyes on the road, hands steady on the wheel. "I want to understand the parts of your life that matter. Church matters to you. Therefore, it matters to me." That Thursday evening, Catherine picked Emma up in a luxury sedan that smelled like leather and subtle perfume, chatting easily about the women Emma would meet and the current study on the Book of Ruth. The Drake family church was larger than Crossroads, with stained glass commissioned by artists and pews that gleamed with recent refinishing. The women who gathered in a small classroom off the main sanctuary were polished and educated, their Bibles expensive leather editions with gilt-edged pages. But Linda, different Linda than her church's Linda, this one younger and sharper, asked questions that dug beneath surface readings. Patricia Ann spoke about loyalty and sacrifice with the insight of someone who'd lived both. Sarah, barely 25, talked about choosing family over comfort with a vulnerability that suggested recent wounds. The discussion turned to Ruth's decision to follow Naomi into uncertainty, leaving everything familiar for the sake of someone she loved. Catherine read the passage aloud, her voice catching slightly on, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay." That kind of commitment terrifies me. Sarah's admission was quiet, promising everything to someone when you don't know how it ends. Patricia Ann smiled, the expression kind rather than condescending. "That's faith, honey. Whether in God or people or yourself. Jumping without seeing the landing." Emma thought about courthouse ceremonies and contracts that promised 6 months, but nothing beyond. About the jump she'd taken signing papers that bound her to a stranger, and how that stranger was becoming incrementally less strange with every dinner conversation and workshop session and small kindness offered without expectation of return. After study, the women stayed for tea and cookies Catherine had arranged, conversations fragmenting into smaller groups. Linda cornered Emma near the refreshment table, her directness reminiscent of her namesake at Crossroads. "Catherine says you're adjusting well to the family." That's diplomatic speak for handling the Drake intensity with grace. Emma sipped tea that was probably expensive, but tasted like tea anywhere. They've been welcoming, more than I expected. William can be stern, but he's fair. And Marcus— Linda paused, seeming to choose words carefully. Marcus has always been the one who feels things most deeply. David's the golden child, brilliant and driven. Marcus is the one who'll give you everything and never tell you it cost him. Rose came home 2 weeks after surgery, her color returned and her energy recovering in increments that the physical therapist called remarkable for someone her age. Marcus helped Emma hire Patricia, the nurse, not the stepmother, for daytime care, and insisted on covering costs that insurance wouldn't. Emma had argued until Marcus pointed out that her grandmother's health directly benefited him by keeping Emma's stress manageable, and therefore could be considered part of their arrangement's intent. They visited together most evenings, bringing dinner from restaurants Rose loved or groceries Emma cooked in the mansion's professional kitchen with Greta's patient instruction. Marcus carried things up the front steps, fixed the porch railing Emma had meant to address for months, repaired the fence gate that had been hanging crooked since winter. The third visit, Rose was strong enough to interrogate him properly. She waited until Emma went to make tea, then fixed Marcus with eyes that had seen through 74 years of human deception and didn't miss much. "Why did you really marry my granddaughter?" Marcus set down the book he'd been pretending to read, meeting her gaze without flinching. "I needed to be married for family business reasons. Emma needed money for your surgery. The arrangement benefited us both." "Beneficial. Such a cold word for marriage." "You're right. The truth is more complicated than beneficial. Emma is the first genuinely good person I've encountered in years who doesn't want anything from me except honesty. That matters more than I can explain." Rose's expression didn't soften. "You were in prison." "Yes, ma'am. 3 years for embezzlement." "Did you take the money?" Marcus's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I pled guilty. I served the sentence. That's what matters legally." "I didn't ask what matters legally. I asked if you took the money." The silence stretched long enough that Emma could hear water boiling in the kitchen, could hear the neighbor's dog barking at something beyond the fence. Marcus's hands were folded in his lap, the knuckles white with tension. "I protected someone I love by accepting responsibility for their choices. Whether I took the money is less important than why the court believed I did." Rose absorbed this, her breathing still labored but steady. "So you're a liar and a martyr." "Which one is worse for my Emma?" "I'm trying to be neither. I'm trying to be someone who learns from protecting others at my own expense, who builds things instead of breaking them, who shows up when it matters." Emma walked back in with tea and found them sitting in weighted silence, Rose watching Marcus with calculation while Marcus met her scrutiny without retreat. Whatever test had just occurred, Emma couldn't tell who'd won. Later, as they drove back toward Westchester, Rose's words echoed in Emma's mind. Liar and martyr. Both implied sacrifice, but for different reasons and with different costs. She wanted to ask Marcus which one he was, but the question felt too intimate for the careful distance they'd maintained. Saturday morning, Marcus asked if Emma wanted to volunteer at the food pantry with him, admitting he'd been going alone for weeks but would appreciate company. They spent 3 hours stocking shelves and serving families, Marcus lifting boxes with easy strength, while Emma organized donations and chatted with regulars she'd known for years. Mr. Washington, ancient and opinionated, cornered Marcus near the canned goods. "Emma's husband? You're the one who helped with her grandmother's surgery?" "I was able to assist, yes, sir." "Good hands." Mr. Washington gestured at the boxes Marcus had been stacking. "You work with those hands. Not just money, that matters. Money's easy when you have it. Sweat's what shows character. Afterward, they walked through the neighborhood where Emma had grown up, past the corner store that still sold candy by the piece, and the playground where she'd learned to pump her legs on swings. Marcus bought them both coffee from a cart vendor who knew Emma by name, and they sat on a bench watching kids play basketball on a court with chain nets and asphalt worn smooth by decades of sneakers. "This is home for you." "Not the mansion." Emma sipped coffee that was too sweet but familiar. "This is where I learned who I am. The mansion is where I'm learning who I might become." Marcus turned to look at her, his expression arrested by something in her words. The afternoon light caught his features at an angle that made him look younger, less guarded, and Emma felt her breath catch at the realization that somewhere between courthouse bows and Bible study and Saturday morning volunteering, she'd started noticing him as more than a contractual obligation. He reached up, brushing hair away from her face where wind had blown it across her eyes. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and gentle, and Emma's pulse jumped at the contact. Marcus leaned closer, his intention clear in the way his gaze dropped to her mouth. And Emma found herself leaning in as well, closing the distance between strangers and something else entirely. Her phone rang, the ringtone she'd set for Rose's nurse, urgent and impossible to ignore. Emma jerked back, fumbling for her phone while Marcus withdrew his hand and looked away, jaw tight with something that might have been frustration or relief. Patricia's voice was calm but professional, explaining that Rose's blood pressure had spiked during physical therapy, and she wanted Emma to know, even though everything was under control now. Emma thanked her, hung up, and found Marcus already standing, ready to drive her to Queens if needed. "She's fine, just a precaution." "Still, we should check on her." The moment dissipated, like morning fog under direct sun, leaving only awkwardness and unspoken questions about what would have happened if Patricia hadn't called. They drove to Rose's house in silence that felt different than the comfortable quiet they'd developed, charged with awareness neither seemed ready to address. A week later, Catherine announced that the engagement party was scheduled for 3 weeks out, inviting 200 guests to celebrate Marcus and Emma's union properly, since the courthouse ceremony had been so abbreviated. Emma stood in the mansion's formal dining room while Catherine explained seating charts and catering options and the importance of making the right impression on business associates whose names Emma would never remember. "We'll need to get you a dress, something elegant but not ostentatious. You want to look like you belong without trying too hard." The phrasing rankled, the implication that Emma naturally didn't belong and would need costuming to pass. But Catherine meant it kindly, her enthusiasm genuine as she described the mansion's ballroom transformed for the occasion, and the orchestra already booked. That evening, Emma searched Thomas Sterling Drake Industries on her laptop, following threads Catherine had mentioned in passing about old family friends and business connections. Thomas Sterling appeared in multiple photos with William Drake, their companies apparently collaborating on real estate ventures going back decades. Sterling's daughter Vanessa showed up in society pages, beautiful and polished, photographed at charity events and gallery openings. One photo stopped Emma's scrolling. Vanessa and Marcus at some gala 8 months prior, both formally dressed, standing close enough to suggest familiarity. The caption mentioned longtime family friends and business merger discussions. Emma clicked through to Vanessa's Instagram, finding carefully curated images of a life Emma couldn't fathom. European vacations and Michelin-starred restaurants and designer clothes worn once for photos, then presumably discarded. But 8 months back, there was Marcus again, this time with a caption that read, "Some connections run deeper than business." The timeline crystallized. Marcus released from prison, immediately involved with Vanessa Sterling, then suddenly refusing an arranged marriage and seeking out Emma instead. Whatever had happened between refusing Vanessa and approaching Emma about a contract, it had occurred in the span of weeks. Emma pulled up the charity event from 8 months ago, where Marcus and Vanessa had been photographed together. The venue was listed: the Metropolitan Children's Foundation Autumn Gala. Emma knew that event. She'd volunteered there, helping coordinate activities for the children brought in to meet donors. She'd been there the night Marcus saw Vanessa, might have walked past him while carrying supplies or directing kids to the crafts table, completely unaware that her life was about to intersect with his in ways she couldn't have imagined. The study door downstairs was closed, but light showed beneath it. Emma had learned that when William and Marcus were in there, interruption was unwelcome unless urgent. But Marcus's home office, barely used, sat one floor up with unlocked doors and filing cabinets he hadn't bothered securing. Emma told herself she was just curious. Told herself that understanding the man she'd married, even temporarily, was reasonable due diligence. Told herself anything that justified opening drawers and flipping through folders labeled personal finances and family business and legal matters confidential. The trust fund documents were buried beneath tax returns and property deeds. $50 million held in Marcus's name, accessible upon meeting conditions outlined in William Drake's amended will. Marriage by age 30 being primary among them. $50 million. Not the comfortable wealth Emma had imagined when Catherine mentioned real estate holdings. Generational fortune. The kind that built dynasties and bought political influence and never thought twice about $95,000 for a stranger's grandmother. Emma's hands shook as she photographed pages with her phone, documenting evidence of a lie she'd suspected but hadn't wanted confirmed. Marcus wasn't just wealthy, he was obscenely, impossibly rich. And he'd approached her wearing prison photos and humble explanations about family expectations, while sitting on enough money to solve every problem Emma had ever encountered, and thousands more she'd never imagined having. The folder beneath revealed David's employment history: Morrison and Associates Law Firm, Junior Associate, 2020 to 2021. The exact period when $300,000 had disappeared from client accounts, when Marcus had been arrested and convicted, when he'd started serving a sentence that everyone now assured Emma had been about protecting family. She heard footsteps on the stairs. Emma shoved folders back into place with clumsy hands, eased the drawer shut as quietly as possible, and slipped out of the office just as Marcus appeared at the landing. Looking for something? Her heart hammered against her ribs. Bathroom. Got turned around. 3 doors down. He studied her face, and Emma knew her expression was guilty, knew she looked caught, but Marcus just nodded and continued past her toward his own room. Emma made it to her suite before her knees gave out, sinking onto the bed while her mind reeled through implications. $50 million. David's convenient employment history. The timeline that suggested Marcus had seen her months before approaching her with his contract offer. She called David the next morning, her voice steady despite the fury building in her chest. I need to meet with you. Just us, today. He suggested a coffee shop in Manhattan, neutral territory away from both the mansion and Emma's neighborhood. She arrived first, claimed a corner table, and waited with mounting tension until David appeared, looking nervous and guilty, his usual composed lawyer facade cracking before he'd even sat down. You know about the embezzlement. Emma didn't bother with pleasantries. I know Marcus worked at the same firm where money went missing. I know the timeline matches exactly, and I know your brother went to prison for 3 years while you became the family's golden child attorney. So yes, David, I know. He slumped in his chair, the fight draining out of him with visible relief. I've wanted to tell someone for years. Anyone. The weight of it. Tell me now. Everything. The story spilled out in fragments. David at 24, brilliant and ambitious, and catastrophically stupid about gambling. Debts mounting to figures that terrified him. Loan sharks calling. threats escalating. Borrowing from client accounts at Morrison and Associates with full intention to pay it back once he figured out how. The money disappearing faster than he could replace it. Senior partners noticing discrepancies. An investigation that was going to destroy him. Marcus had found out by accident, seeing David's panic and forcing the truth from him, had immediately confessed to the embezzlement himself, fabricating a gambling problem and substance issues to explain the missing money. Had negotiated a guilty plea to keep David's name completely out of it, accepting minimum security prison rather than fighting charges he could have beaten with the Drake family's legal resources. He told me it was because I had my whole career ahead of me, because I had health problems that would make real prison dangerous, because father couldn't know his perfect son was a criminal. He made me promise to be the attorney father thought I was, to live up to the reputation Marcus was sacrificing his freedom to protect. Emma's anger crystallized into something colder and sharper, and William never questioned it? Never wondered why Marcus would suddenly develop problems he'd never shown before? Father was disappointed, but not surprised. He'd always thought Marcus was too impulsive, too emotional, too likely to make reckless choices. It fit his existing narrative about which son was responsible and which one needed saving from himself. Does Marcus have access to the trust fund without being married? David met her eyes, his expression miserable. He always had access. The marriage clause was father's addition to the will while Marcus was incarcerated. His way of forcing Marcus to settle down and mature. Marcus didn't even know about it until 2 months ago, when father's lawyer informed him the clause was now active. The coffee shop sounds faded to white noise. Emma felt her understanding of the past 3 weeks reconstructing itself around this new information. Marcus hadn't needed to marry her for money, hadn't needed the contract for access to anything except the business leadership position William had made conditional on demonstrating stability through marriage. Why did he choose me? There are thousands of women who would have agreed to a temporary marriage for money. Women from his own social circle who wouldn't have required explanations or church attendance or separate bedrooms. David shook his head. You'd have to ask him that, but I can tell you he refused to marry Vanessa Sterling, despite enormous pressure from both families. Walked away from a $200 million business merger because he said he'd met someone who reminded him what genuine goodness looked like. When did he meet this person? 8 months ago, right after he got out of prison. He wouldn't tell me who, just that he'd seen someone at a charity event and couldn't get them out of his mind. Emma pulled up the gala photos on her phone, showed David the image of Marcus and Vanessa. This event? Probably. That was right before he refused the Sterling arrangement. The pieces assembled themselves into a pattern Emma had been too close to see. Marcus at the gala with Vanessa, supposedly cementing an arranged marriage that would solve both families' business interests. Emma in the background, volunteering with children, completely unaware she was being observed. Marcus refusing Vanessa the following week, citing mysterious someone else. Then, months later, approaching Emma through Patricia with an offer that seemed too convenient to be coincidence. He's been planning this since he saw me that night. David's silence was confirmation enough. Emma thanked him mechanically and left the coffee shop, walking on autopilot through Manhattan crowds that parted around her like water around stone. She found herself at Grand Central, staring up at the constellation ceiling while commuters rushed past, everyone knowing exactly where they needed to be, while Emma stood frozen, trying to understand if she'd been saved or hunted. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, asking if she wanted to have dinner with just him tonight instead of the usual family gathering. Emma stared at the message, reading manipulation or kindness, or both, into the simple question. She texted back that they needed to talk, and yes, dinner alone would be good. Marcus chose a small restaurant in Queens, the kind of place with vinyl booths and menus laminated against years of use, where nobody would recognize the Drake name or care about society connections. Emma arrived first, her anger a living thing coiled tight in her chest, and when Marcus walked through the door, she didn't wait for him to sit before launching the first strike. You've been lying to me from the beginning. Not small lies, foundational ones that change everything. He slid into the booth across from her, his expression careful but not surprised. What did you find? $50 million. Your trust fund that you apparently can access whether you're married or not. David's confession about the embezzlement. The charity gala 8 months ago where you saw me and decided I'd make a convenient wife. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny anything. I told you I'd been less than completely honest. Less than completely honest? You presented yourself as someone who needed marriage for financial access when you're sitting on a fortune that could buy small countries. You let me think we were equally desperate when you were hunting me like... She stopped, the word prey dying on her tongue, but the implication hanging heavy between them. I never lied about needing the marriage for family business reasons. That was always true. But you lied about everything else. The money, the timeline, the fact that you'd been watching me for months before Patricia conveniently showed up with her offer. Emma's voice was rising despite her intention to stay controlled. Other diners were starting to glance their way. Did you even build that bookshelf yourself? Or was that just another manipulation? I built it. Every piece. Spent 3 weeks getting the measurements right because I'm terrible at woodworking and didn't want to fail at the one honest thing I could offer you. Honest? There's nothing honest about any of this. Marcus leaned forward, his own anger finally surfacing. You want honesty? Fine. I saw you at that gala 8 months ago, reading to a group of kids who were bored out of their minds at a fancy fundraiser. You did all the voices, made them laugh, treated them like they mattered instead of like props for wealthy donors to feel charitable about. And I stood there watching you and thinking, that's what goodness looks like. That's what I want to become. So you stalked me. I didn't stalk you. I went to places I thought you might volunteer because I wanted to be near that goodness, wanted to learn how to access it in myself. The library programs, the food pantry, church. I started showing up hoping to run into you, hoping to find the courage to introduce myself properly. Emma's hands were shaking. And when my grandmother got sick, when Patricia showed up with her convenient contract offer, I asked Patricia, through her event company, to let me know if she ever encountered someone who might need help and be willing to consider an arrangement. I didn't know about Rose's illness. I didn't plan for your crisis. His voice dropped, rough with something that sounded like pain. But when Patricia called and said her stepdaughter needed surgery money, I won't lie. I saw an opportunity to help you and get close to you at the same time. Was it manipulative? Yes. Was it selfish disguised as generosity? Absolutely. But my feelings were never fake. How can I believe anything you say when it's all been built on deception? Marcus pulled something from his jacket pocket, setting it on the table between them, a small wooden box, simple and hand-carved. Open it. Inside was a ring. Not expensive, not diamond, just a band carved from wood with a small piece of sea glass set in the center. The craftsmanship was amateur, the setting slightly crooked, but the care evident in every detail. I made this 3 months ago. Before Rose got sick. Before I'd worked up the courage to approach you. Before I had any plan except hoping. The wood is from the first bookshelf I ever built in prison. The one that taught me I could create instead of destroy. The sea glass I found on a beach during my last month at Rikers. The only beautiful thing in that whole gray place. Emma stared at the ring, her anger warring with something softer and more dangerous. Why are you showing me this now? Because you asked for honesty. The honest truth is, I fell in love with you before I knew your name. I engineered circumstances to meet you because I was a coward who couldn't just walk up and introduce myself. I have $50 million I never told you about because I wanted you to see me as someone who needed you, not someone who could buy your cooperation. Every lie I told was in service of making myself seem less powerful and more human, because I was terrified you'd see the money and the family name and decide I wasn't worth knowing beneath all that privilege. The waitress appeared asking about orders. Neither of them had looked at menus. Marcus ordered coffee for both of them without asking what Emma wanted, then caught himself and apologized, and even that small moment of assumed authority followed by immediate correction felt like a microcosm of their entire relationship. I need time to process this. All of it. The engagement party is in 2 weeks. If you want to cancel it, tell me now and I'll handle everything with my family. Emma thought about 200 guests already invited, Catherine's careful planning, the dress ordered and the orchestra booked, and the public performance of a relationship that had started as transaction and evolved into something she couldn't name. What happens to your business succession if we don't go through with the party? I'll figure something else out. Your comfort matters more than my family's expectations. Stop doing that. Stop being understanding when I want you to be a villain I can hate cleanly. Marcus's smile was sad and knowing. I can't be a villain when I'm sitting across from the person I'd burn down everything I own to protect. I can only be what I am, someone who loves you badly and is trying to learn how to love you better. Coffee arrived. Emma wrapped her hands around the cup for something solid to hold on to, while her world kept tilting sideways. Part of her wanted to walk out, return to the mansion for her things, sign whatever paperwork would dissolve their contract, and let her return to a life that made sense. But another part, larger and louder, remembered surgical waiting rooms and Saturday morning volunteering, and the way Marcus had agreed to every condition she'd set without trying to negotiate his own comfort first. I talked to Vanessa Sterling. Marcus went very still. When? She called me yesterday, wanted to warn me about your family's arrangement, about how you were supposed to marry her until you suddenly refused. She told me about seeing you at the gala, about you watching someone in the background that night. Vanessa is... Marcus stopped, choosing words carefully. She was relieved when I backed out of our arrangement. She's been in love with someone else for over a year, but too afraid to disappoint her father by refusing the Drake merger. She seemed to think I deserved to know what I was getting into. That you and your family use people as chess pieces in business games, I don't understand. Did she tell you that her father, Thomas Sterling, has been trying to force a merger with Drake Industries for 5 years? That he sees our marriage as the easiest path to controlling my family's business interests? Marcus's voice hardened. Vanessa means well, but she's also trying to make sure you understand the stakes so you don't accidentally become collateral damage in her father's ambitions. Emma pulled out her phone, showed Marcus a text that had arrived that morning. Thomas Sterling requesting a meeting to discuss mutual interests before the engagement party. What does he want with me? To confirm you're real and not just a convenient placeholder I'm using to avoid marrying Vanessa. He's threatened before to expose various family secrets if we don't cooperate with his merger plans. Meeting you gives him ammunition either way. If you're legitimate, he'll try to turn you against me. If you're not, he'll use that to pressure my father into reconsidering the Sterling arrangement. So I'm trapped in business politics I never agreed to. You're free to walk away anytime. I meant that when I said it. Marcus met her eyes, his expression stripped of pretense. But if you stay, I'll do everything I can to keep you protected from my family's complications. The restaurant was filling with dinner crowd, noise levels rising as families claimed tables and placed orders. Emma watched Marcus across from her. This man who'd gone to prison for his brother and watched her for months before approaching, and built furniture with hands that knew generational wealth but chose manual labor anyway. The lies were real. The manipulation was undeniable, but the person underneath felt genuine in ways she couldn't dismiss, even when anger demanded she try. I'm going to the engagement party, not because I've forgiven you, but because I need to see this through to understand what I'm walking away from. Relief flashed across Marcus's features before he controlled it. Thank you. But after the party, we're renegotiating terms. Real honesty, real transparency, or I'm done. Agreed. Whatever you need. They ate dinner in silence that felt different than the comfortable quiet they'd developed before Emma knew about the $50 million and the charity gala and all the ways Marcus had constructed their meeting. This silence was weighted with secrets exposed and trust damaged, with the awareness that relationships built on deception had to be dismantled and rebuilt with better materials or abandoned entirely to crumble on their own. The 2 weeks before the engagement party passed in careful distance. Marcus gave Emma space, retreating to his workshop most evenings instead of joining family dinners. Catherine noticed, but didn't push, simply including Emma in dress fittings and party preparations with the efficiency of someone managing logistics rather than emotions. William remained formally polite. David avoided Emma entirely, and the household staff treated her with the same kindness they always had, unaware that the foundation had developed cracks. Emma threw herself into work at the library, staying late to organize donation drives and plan literacy programs, anything to avoid returning to the mansion before exhaustion made sleep inevitable. Rose noticed the strain during their visits, her perceptiveness cutting through Emma's attempts at cheerful updates. What did he do? Emma told her everything. The money, the planning, the way Marcus had seen her months before engineering their introduction. Rose listened without interrupting, her hands folded over the blanket covering her lap, her expression thoughtful rather than shocked. Do you think he loves you? I think he loves the idea of me, the goodness he saw in a stranger at a charity event. But how can he love the real me when our entire relationship was built on circumstances he manipulated? Rose was quiet for a long moment. Your grandfather told me he was a stock boy at the grocery store when we met. Turned out he was the owner's son, working floor shifts to learn the business. Lied because he wanted me to like him for himself, not his family's money. That's different. Is it? He saw me working checkout, decided I was worth pursuing, and created a situation where we'd interact without the complication of wealth imbalance. I was furious when I found out, felt manipulated and stupid. But then I had to ask myself, did the lie change who he was as a person? Did it erase the kindness he'd shown, the respect, the genuine interest in my thoughts and dreams? What did you decide? That loving someone means accepting they're flawed, that they make choices out of fear sometimes, that the question isn't whether they're perfect, but whether they're trying to become better. Rose reached for Emma's hand. This boy went to prison for his brother, built you furniture, sat with you through surgery. Those aren't actions of someone using you. Those are actions of someone who doesn't know how else to show you he cares. The engagement party arrived with the momentum of something already in motion, impossible to stop even if Emma had wanted to. The mansion's ballroom was transformed with flowers and fabric, with round tables dressed in ivory silk and centerpieces that probably cost more than Emma's monthly library salary. An orchestra tuned instruments in the corner. Waiters in formal wear moved through with practiced efficiency, carrying trays of champagne and delicate appetizers. Emma stood in her suite, wearing the midnight blue dress Catherine had chosen, staring at her reflection and barely recognizing the woman in expensive fabric and borrowed jewelry. The sapphire necklace Catherine insisted she wear had belonged to Marcus's grandmother, the woman in the portrait downstairs with fierce eyes and his jawline. Marcus knocked softly before entering, stopping when he saw her. "You're beautiful." "I'm terrified." "Of the party or of me?" "Both. Everything. This whole performance we're about to give for people who matter to you in ways I don't understand." He crossed to her, stopping just close enough that she could smell his cologne, something subtle and expensive that she'd started associating with safety despite everything. "We don't have to do this. I can go downstairs right now and tell everyone there's been a change of plans." "And then what? We pretend the last month didn't happen? Go back to being strangers?" "No. Then we start over from the beginning. I ask you to coffee properly. No contracts or arrangements. Just two people getting to know each other without all this weight." Emma wanted that more than she could articulate. Wanted to press restart on their entire relationship, strip away the lies and manipulation, and rebuild from honest ground. But Rose was recovering because of Marcus's money. Emma lived in this mansion because of their contract. The last month had happened, and wishing it away changed nothing. Let's get through tonight first. The ballroom was already filling when they descended the grand staircase together, Marcus's hand warm and steady at the small of Emma's back. 200 faces turned toward them, applause rising as Catherine made introductions and William raised a glass in formal toast. Emma smiled until her cheeks ached, shook hands with business associates whose names evaporated from memory seconds after hearing them, made small talk about wedding plans and how wonderful Marcus was, while her mind spun with the dissonance between performance and reality. Thomas Sterling arrived late, making an entrance that drew attention with its presumption of importance. He was tall, silver-haired, with the kind of presence that came from decades of being the most powerful person in any room. Vanessa accompanied him, stunning in emerald silk, her smile polite and practiced as she greeted the Drake family. Sterling found Emma during cocktail hour, cornering her near the champagne fountain with practiced ease. "Miss Carson, or should I say Mrs. Drake. I've been eager to meet the woman who captured Marcus's elusive heart." "Mr. Sterling, Vanessa speaks highly of your family." "Does she? How generous, given the disappointment Marcus caused us by withdrawing from our arrangement." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Though I suppose love conquers all, even business sense." Emma felt the threat beneath the pleasantries, the way Sterling was testing her knowledge and commitment. "Marcus and I are very happy together." "Of course you are, though I can't help wondering, did he tell you about the trust fund clause? The $50 million he gains access to next month on his 30th birthday?" Marcus appeared at $50 million is quite the incentive for a rushed marriage to a stranger, wouldn't you say? Emma felt the room's focus shift entirely to her, felt the weight of speculation and judgment from 200 strangers who were rapidly reassessing everything about her relationship with Marcus. Whispers started, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. "Is that true? 50 million for getting married? The timeline does seem convenient." Poor girl probably had no idea what she was getting into. William's face had gone red with fury, though whether directed at Sterling or Marcus wasn't clear. Catherine looked stricken, her careful party planning crumbling under the weight of scandal. David had gone pale, standing frozen near the bar like he wanted to disappear entirely. Sterling continued, savoring his moment. "And of course, there's the matter of the embezzlement conviction, though I've always wondered about the details there. Marcus was never particularly interested in gambling before prison, but his brother David," he gestured toward where David stood, "had quite the reputation for poor financial decisions around the time that money went missing from Morrison and Associates." The implications hung in the air, poisonous and inescapable. Emma watched David's face confirm everything. watched William's expression shift from anger to dawning horror as he looked between his sons and started connecting pieces he'd refused to see for 3 years. Marcus's hand tightened on Emma's arm. "Emma, let's go." But she was already moving, pushing through the crowd toward the French doors that led to the gardens, needing air and space and distance from the spectacle Sterling had created. The ballroom sounds faded as she stepped outside into night air that felt too cold after the overheated crush of bodies and revelations. She made it to the rose garden before her knees gave out, sinking onto a stone bench while her mind tried to process what had just happened. Everything she'd learned privately had been exposed publicly, weaponized by someone playing games she didn't understand for stakes she couldn't fathom. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Marcus appeared, breathless from chasing her, his formal wear disheveled and his expression wrecked. "Emma, please. Did everyone in that room know except me? Did they all think I was some convenient gold digger who'd married you for money?" "No one thinks that. Sterling does. Your father's business associates do. Probably half your family does now." She stood, pacing away from him. "I was naive enough to think our contract was private, that I could help my grandmother and help you, and nobody would judge me for choosing survival. But it's all public now, all exposed, and I'm standing here in borrowed jewelry at a party for a relationship built on lies." Marcus moved toward her, but stopped when she held up a hand. "I never wanted this. Never wanted you exposed to Sterling's games or my family's politics. But you knew it was possible. You knew getting involved with you meant walking into business battles I don't understand." Her voice broke. "I can't do this. I can't be paraded around as evidence of your stability while people whisper about trust funds and convenient timing." "Then don't. We'll leave right now. Pack your things, move back to your apartment, file for divorce tomorrow if that's what you need." "Just like that? You'd give up everything you needed this marriage for?" "I'd give up everything I own if it meant keeping you from being hurt by my mistakes." He pulled the wooden ring from his pocket, the one he'd shown her at the restaurant. "I made this hoping someday I'd be worthy of offering it to you properly. Not as part of a contract or arrangement, but because I loved you enough to deserve the chance. I'm not worthy yet. Maybe I never will be, but walking away from you because it's easier than fighting for us would make me the person Sterling accused me of being." Emma looked at the ring, at this imperfect, handmade thing that represented 3 months of hoping and planning and building toward a future Marcus had wanted before he'd even spoken to her. The manipulation was still real. The lies were still lies. But standing in a garden while a party imploded inside, she had to acknowledge that Marcus had also shown up consistently, built things with his hands, agreed to every condition without negotiation, and was now offering to walk away from everything if that's what protected her. "I need time, real time, away from this mansion and your family and all these complications. I'm going to Rose's house, and I don't want you to follow me." His face was anguish and acceptance combined. "Take all the time you need. I'll handle everything here." Emma walked past him toward the circular driveway where her old Honda sat among luxury vehicles that cost 10 times what it was worth. She drove away from the mansion without looking back, leaving Marcus standing alone in the garden while 200 guests whispered inside and his carefully constructed world collapsed around the foundation of lies he'd built. Rose's house was dark when Emma arrived, her grandmother already asleep for the night. Emma let herself in with her key, curling up on the couch that still smelled like the lavender sachets Rose had made decades ago. She cried until exhaustion took over, then drifted into uneasy sleep while her phone buzzed with messages she didn't have the strength to read. Morning brought clarity without comfort. Emma woke to find Rose in her recliner, watching with the kind of patient observation that suggested she'd been awake for hours waiting. Party didn't go well? Emma told her everything. Sterling's exposure, the public humiliation, Marcus offering to give up everything. Rose listened, then gestured Emma closer until she could take both her granddaughter's hands in her own. Listen to me carefully because this is important. Your grandfather lied to me about his family's grocery store empire. When I found out, I felt exactly like you do now. Manipulated, stupid, furious. You know what I did? Left him? Almost. Packed my bags, went to my sister's house, spent a week crying and raging. Then I asked myself one question. Did the lie change who he was when he was with me? Did it make the conversations less real, the laughter less genuine, the care less authentic? What did you decide? That people lie for different reasons. Some lie to take advantage. Some lie because they're afraid of losing something precious. Your grandfather lied because he thought I wouldn't love a rich boy the same way I'd love someone I thought was working class like me. He was wrong. I would have loved him regardless, but his fear was real. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Marcus manipulated our entire meeting. And he also sat with you through 8 hours of surgery without being asked. Built furniture because he wanted to give you something made with his own hands. Went to 6 a.m. Bible study because you needed to see him in church. Baby, manipulation and genuine care can exist in the same person. The question is, which one wins out over time? How do I know? You watch what he does next. If he disappears, you have your answer. If he shows up, really shows up, doing the work even when there's no guarantee of forgiveness, that tells you something different. Marcus showed up the next morning while Emma was making coffee in Rose's small kitchen. She heard his truck pull into the driveway, heard his footsteps on the porch, and steeled herself for the conversation she wasn't ready to have. Instead, Marcus simply knocked once, waited for her to answer, and held up a toolbox. Your gutters are sagging on the east side. Going to fix them. I'm not here to talk unless you want to. Just here to work. He spent 3 hours on a ladder, securing gutters and clearing debris from downspouts, working in silence while Emma watched from inside, confused and suspicious. When he finished, he packed his tools, waved to Rose, who'd come out to the porch, and drove away without trying to engage Emma in conversation. The next morning he was back, this time fixing the fence gate that had been hanging crooked since winter, replacing rotted boards and reinforcing hinges with new hardware. He worked methodically, precisely, stopping only to accept the water Rose brought him before returning to his task. Finished, packed, left. Day 3. Building a wheelchair ramp. Rose's physical therapist had recommended, but Emma couldn't afford. Day 4. Weeding the garden and repairing the raised beds Emma's grandfather had built decades ago. Day 5. Painting the trim that had been peeling for years. Emma watched this pattern develop with growing confusion. Marcus never asked to come inside beyond the porch, never tried to explain or justify or plead his case. Just showed up every morning, did honest work, and left when the task was complete. Mrs. Chen noticed, appearing on day 6 with a casserole and opinions. That your husband? Been seeing his truck every morning when I walk my dog. He's fixing things. Saw him help Mr. Patterson move furniture yesterday. Didn't charge, didn't ask for thanks, just did the work and moved on. Mrs. Chen studied Emma's face. Good hands doing good work. That's worth something. By the second week, the neighborhood had started to notice. Emma overheard conversations at the food pantry about the young man who'd fixed Mrs. Rodriguez's mailbox and helped the Johnsons install a new door, and spent Saturday afternoon teaching kids at the playground how to repair their bikes. Pastor Miller mentioned during Sunday service that someone had anonymously donated new hymnals, though the delivery truck had come from Drake Industries. Emma found Marcus on day 14 replacing boards on Rose's back deck. She stood watching from the kitchen window while he measured and cut with careful precision, his movements economical and practiced, despite his admitted lack of experience. When he took a break for water, she brought it out herself instead of sending Rose. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Because I need to prove I can show up. Not with money or grand gestures, but with my hands and my time and actual effort." "For how long?" "As long as it takes. I'll fix every house on this block if that's what shows you I'm serious." "And if I never forgive you?" His smile was sad, but genuine. "Then at least your neighborhood will have nice porches and working gutters, and I'll know I tried to become the person you deserved from the beginning." The prison journals arrived by courier on day 17. David sent them with a note explaining Marcus had wanted Emma to have them months ago, but hadn't found the courage. Emma opened the first volume that night after Rose went to sleep, reading entries that started angry and bitter, chronicling early days of incarceration and the weight of protecting a secret that cost his freedom. But the later entries transformed into something else entirely. Marcus writing about woodworking classes that gave him purpose, about reading everything the prison library offered, about the slow understanding that he could choose who to become, even inside walls that confined his body. And then, in the final months, mentions of a charity event he'd volunteered for during a brief work release program. "Saw someone today who reminded me what goodness looks like." She was reading to kids like they were the most important audience in the world, doing all the voices, completely unself-conscious and kind. I don't know her name, but I keep thinking about that kindness, about whether I could learn to access something like it in myself. The entries continued, detailing his return to freedom and the decision to volunteer places where he might see that kindness again. The library programs he attended, sitting in the back, watching Emma shelve books and help patrons with quiet patience. The food pantry where he worked across the room, observing how she treated every person with equal dignity. Church services where he sat 3 pews back, listening to her sing slightly off-key with complete joy. I'm obsessed, I know that. It's been 3 months of showing up places, hoping to see her, hoping to work up the courage to introduce myself. But how do I approach someone that good? What do I even say? "Hi, I'm an ex-con who's been watching you volunteer for months because you make me believe redemption is possible." Then Rose's illness, the hospital, the overheard conversation about surgery costs. Marcus's entry from that night was stark and honest. "She's terrified and trying so hard to be brave. Her grandmother is dying and she's selling jewelry to pawn shops and calling everyone she knows, begging for money. And I have $50 million I can't touch without marriage. Millions more I could access today, and I can't just hand it to a stranger. But I also can't watch her suffer knowing I could help." Patricia from church runs an event company. Maybe she knows a way to approach this that doesn't make me look like a stalker or a predator. I just want to help. Please, God, let there be a way to help that doesn't hurt her more. Emma read through the night, watching Marcus's thought process evolve from hope to plan to action. He'd asked Patricia to facilitate an introduction if the opportunity arose, never imagining that opportunity would come through genuine crisis. Had agonized for days about whether offering help through a contract was exploitation or solution. Had built the first bookshelf as practice before ever meeting Emma, wanting to have something real and handmade to offer if she agreed to his arrangement. Tomorrow I meet her officially. I'm terrified she'll see through me, see the manipulation and the selfish hope underneath the help I'm offering. But I built her a bookshelf. It's clumsy, but honest, made with my own hands, thinking about her with every cut of wood. Maybe that will show her I'm trying. Maybe it won't be enough. Either way, tomorrow changes everything. The final entry was dated the day before their courthouse wedding. I married Emma Carson today. Contract marriage, business arrangement, 6 months, and then we're done. Except I know I'm not going to want to be done. I know 6 months from now, I'm going to be even more in love with her, and she's probably going to hate me for lying about the money and the planning and all the ways I engineered our meeting. I should tell her the truth now, before we sign anything. But I'm a coward who's afraid she'll walk away if she knows how much I've been watching, hoping, building my entire future around someone who doesn't know I exist. God forgive me. I'm going to do this anyway. And I'm going to spend 6 months trying to become worthy of her, even though I'll probably fail. Emma closed the final journal as dawn light filtered through Rose's curtains. She'd spent the night reading the evolution of Marcus's feelings, watching him fall in love with an idea of her that gradually became more real as they spent time together. The manipulation was documented in his own hand, the planning, the engineering, the careful construction of circumstances. But so was the genuine care, the fear of inadequacy, the desperate hope that he could become someone worthy of the goodness he'd seen in a stranger. She found Marcus that morning, replacing rotted boards on the Johnsons' porch 3 houses down. He looked up when she approached, his expression guarded and hopeful in equal measure. I read the journals. His hands stilled on the hammer he'd been using. All of them? Every word. 3 years of prison entries, 8 months of you watching me and building furniture and trying to convince yourself you weren't being a creep. I was being a creep. I know that. I just didn't know how else to approach you without all my money and family name getting in the way. Emma sat down on the porch steps, and Marcus carefully set down his tools and joined her, maintaining respectful distance. You went to prison for David. You watched me for months before getting the courage to speak to me. You built me a bookshelf and made me a ring and spent the last 3 weeks fixing houses in my neighborhood because you didn't know what else to do with your guilt. Yes, that's either the most romantic thing I've ever heard or the most disturbing. I genuinely can't tell which. Marcus's laugh was rough and startled. Probably both. I don't have a good track record of doing things the right way. No, you don't. But you do have a track record of showing up, of doing the work even when it's hard and inconvenient and there's no guarantee anyone will appreciate it. She turned to look at him directly. The strongest foundations aren't built on perfection. They're built on 2 people refusing to give up, even when everything is broken. Even when the easy choice is walking away. His expression shifted, hope rising carefully like he was afraid to believe. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't forgive you yet. I'm saying the lies still hurt, and I'm still angry, and I don't know if I'll ever fully trust that you're not manipulating situations to your advantage. She reached for his hand, feeling the calluses from 3 weeks of manual labor. But I'm also saying I see you trying. I see you showing up every day, doing honest work, becoming the person you wrote about wanting to be. And I think maybe that's worth more than starting over with someone who never hurt me because they never knew me well enough to have that power. Marcus's fingers tightened around hers. I love you. Not the idea of you, not the fantasy, but the real you who gets angry and calls me on my bullshit and demands honesty even when it's uncomfortable. I love you enough to spend the rest of my life earning your trust, if that's what it takes. That's a long time to prove yourself. I have a long time to make up for. Emma thought about Rose's words, about watching what people do when they don't have to do anything, about the difference between manipulation for advantage and deception born from fear. Marcus had been afraid she wouldn't want him if she knew how wealthy he was, how obsessed he'd been, how carefully he'd constructed their meeting. So he'd lied. But he'd also shown up consistently, built things with his hands, sat through 8-hour surgeries, and agreed to every condition without negotiation. I have conditions, new ones. Whatever you need. We do this right. Real courtship, real dating. Like we're starting over, but with all the truth on the table. You tell me about the family business politics, about Sterling's vendetta, about what your inheritance actually means for our future. No more surprises. Agreed. And we get married again. For real this time. Not in a courthouse, but in a church, with vows we write ourselves and mean completely. Pastor Miller officiating, my community there, your family if they still accept me after Sterling's exposure. They never stopped accepting you. My father is furious with me, not you. David confessed everything, and William is processing the fact that both his sons lied to him for 3 years. But Catherine calls daily, asking when you're coming home. That's the other thing. We don't live in the mansion. We find our own place, something we choose together that isn't wrapped up in your family's wealth and expectations. Marcus was quiet, processing the scope of what she was asking. I'd be giving up a lot of convenience and comfort. I know, but I need to know you'd choose me over all of that. That our life together is built on choices we both make, not just circumstances you engineered. Then we'll find our own place. Something small and normal where I can build furniture and you can have actual shelves full of books. He stood, pulling her up with him. Anything else? One more thing. I want you to propose properly, not with a contract or an arrangement, but because you love me and want to spend your life with me. On your knees, with that wooden ring, asking instead of assuming. Marcus went down on one knee, right there on the Johnsons' porch, still holding her hand, his other hand pulling the wooden ring from his pocket where he'd apparently been carrying it for weeks. Emma Carson, I saw you before you saw me, loved you before I knew you, built my entire future around the hope that someday I'd be worthy of asking you this question. I'm not worthy yet. I've lied to you, manipulated circumstances, failed to be the honest man you deserve. But I'm trying to become him. Every day, with every board I replace and every gutter I fix, I'm trying to prove I can be the person who deserves your trust. His voice steadied, conviction replacing nervousness. I'll never be perfect. I'll probably make mistakes that hurt you because I'm still learning how to love someone without fear. But I promise to show up, to do the work, to choose you over convenience and comfort, and all the easy paths that don't require vulnerability. Will you marry me? Really marry me, with vows and witnesses, and a future we build together brick by brick. Emma looked down at him, kneeling on worn porch boards, his expensive clothes covered in sawdust from a morning of volunteer work, his eyes holding hope and fear in equal measure. She thought about Rose's words about foundations built on showing up, about Pastor Miller's sermon on second chances, about the difference between manipulation and misguided love. Yes, not because I forgive everything, but because I see who you're becoming. Because I believe love is choosing someone even when they're broken, especially when they're broken, and working together to build something better from the pieces. He slipped the wooden ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, despite the amateur craftsmanship and crooked setting. Then Marcus stood and pulled her into his arms, and Emma let herself be held by this complicated man who'd hurt her and helped her in equal measure, who'd lied from fear and told truth from love, who was learning to become better even when it cost him everything he'd thought he wanted. Their first real kiss happened not in a ballroom or a restaurant, but on a stranger's porch in Queens, witnessed by Mrs. Rodriguez watering her garden next door and the Johnson kids watching through their front window. It was sweet and tentative and entirely real, without contracts or arrangements. Just two people choosing each other despite every reason they probably shouldn't. The wedding happened 3 months later in Crossroads Community Church, 50 guests crowding the small sanctuary to witness vows that felt earned rather than contractual. Emma wore a simple white dress her library colleagues helped her choose, carried roses from Rose's garden, and walked down the aisle on her grandmother's arm, while Pastor Miller beamed from the altar. Marcus stood waiting in a suit that cost less than his usual wardrobe, but fit him better somehow, more genuine in its simplicity. David served as best man, carrying the weight of his brother's sacrifice with visible humility. Catherine dabbed tears throughout the ceremony, while William watched with an expression that suggested he was finally seeing his son clearly. Pastor Miller opened with words about redemption and second chances, about communities that chose grace over judgment, and relationships built on showing up daily to do the work. Then he invited Marcus and Emma to speak their vows. Marcus went first, his voice steady despite the emotion underneath. Emma, when I first saw you, I thought you were goodness personified, an ideal I could never reach. I was wrong. You're not an ideal. You're a person who gets angry and scared and makes mistakes just like anyone else. But you're also someone who chooses kindness even when it's hard, who shows up for people you love even when it costs you, who demands honesty even when the truth is painful. You've taught me that real love isn't about being perfect. It's about being present, about choosing each other when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. I promise to show up for you every day, to build our life with my hands and my heart, to be honest even when I'm afraid, to love you not because you're good, but because you're you, complicated and strong and entirely real. I choose you, Emma Carson, today and every day for the rest of my life. Emma's hands shook as she held his, but her voice came out clear. Marcus, you've taught me that loving someone means seeing them completely. The lies and the truth, the manipulation and the genuine care, the mistakes and the attempts to fix them. You're not the fantasy rescuer who appeared to solve my problems. You're a flawed man who made questionable choices out of fear and hope mixed together. But you're also someone who sat through 8 hours of surgery without being asked, who built furniture because you wanted to create instead of destroy, who spent 3 weeks fixing houses in my neighborhood to prove you could show up even without guarantee of forgiveness. That kind of persistence, that kind of vulnerable courage, that's what real love looks like. Not the perfect beginning, but the committed middle. The choice to keep trying even when it's hard. I promise to love you honestly, to call you on your mistakes while also seeing your efforts, to build our life together as equal partners, making choices together rather than having them made for me. I choose you, Marcus Drake, broken pieces and all, because together we're building something stronger than either of us could create alone. Pastor Miller blessed their union with words about foundations built on truth rather than convenience, about marriages that survived because both people refused to quit even when quitting felt easier. Then he pronounced them husband and wife, really and truly, and Marcus kissed Emma with the kind of joy that came from knowing he'd been given grace he didn't deserve and was determined to spend his life becoming worthy of it. The reception happened in the church basement, potluck style, with homemade food from Emma's community and champagne Catherine had quietly donated. Speeches ranged from Pastor Miller's gentle wisdom to Mrs. Chen's blunt assessment that Marcus better treat Emma right or answer to the entire neighborhood. Rose stood with assistance from her walker and spoke about watching Emma grow from grief into strength, about the kind of love that chose to see people clearly and love them anyway. David's speech was quiet and honest. My brother taught me what sacrifice looks like when he went to prison for my mistakes. Emma taught him what grace looks like when she chose to see past his lies to the person trying to become better. Together, they remind us that we're all works in progress, and the question isn't whether we're perfect, but whether we're trying. Emma and Marcus moved into a small house near Rose's neighborhood 3 weeks after the wedding. A 2-bedroom with a yard Marcus immediately started planning a workshop for. They settled into routines of Sunday church and Thursday Bible study, Saturday volunteering, and weeknight dinners with Rose. Marcus started a furniture business, Drake Woodworks, building custom pieces for clients who appreciated handcrafted quality over mass production. Emma kept her library job and expanded into program director, using some of Marcus's trust fund money he'd insisted was theirs jointly to fund literacy programs she'd only dreamed about before. William eventually forgave his sons, though the process took months of family therapy and honest conversations about expectations and disappointments. Drake Industries restructured, with David taking leadership roles he'd always been suited for, while Marcus stepped back from family business politics to focus on building something entirely his own. 2 years later, Emma stood in their backyard, watching Marcus teach their 18-month-old daughter Lily how to sand a piece of wood, both of them covered in sawdust and completely absorbed in the task. Rose sat on the porch in her favorite chair, recovered and healthy, knitting something small for the baby Emma carried 8 months along. Never thought I'd see the day when a Drake learned honest work. Rose's voice carried affection despite the teasing. Marcus looked up, grinning at his grandmother-in-law with genuine warmth. Never thought I'd be grateful for prison teaching me woodworking, but here we are. Willie toddled over to Emma, small hands reaching up, and Emma lifted her daughter carefully around her pregnant belly. This life they'd built felt nothing like the mansion's formal elegance or the contract marriage that had started everything. It was smaller, messier, entirely real. That evening, after Lily was asleep and Rose had returned home, Emma found Marcus on their porch swing, watching fireflies rise from the grass. She settled beside him, his arm coming around her shoulders with familiar ease. Do you ever regret it? Giving up the inheritance and the family business and all that comfortable wealth? Marcus was quiet, considering. Sometimes I miss the convenience. But then I look at what we built. This house, Lily, the business I created from scratch, and I realize we're richer than I ever was before. Not in money, but in the things that actually matter. Emma thought about the hospital chapel 2 years ago, her desperate prayer for a miracle to save Rose. She'd thought the miracle was the money for surgery, the contract that solved her immediate crisis. But the real miracle had been Marcus learning to show up consistently, choosing vulnerability over protection, becoming the person he'd wanted to be all along. I used to think salvation came through having everything figured out, through making perfect choices and never failing, but I've learned it comes through showing up even when you're broken, choosing love even when it's built on imperfect foundations, becoming better even when the process is messy and painful. That's what makes it real. Marcus pulled her closer, his hand resting on her stomach where their second child grew. Best trade I ever made. Everything I owned for everything that matters. They sat in comfortable silence while darkness deepened and stars emerged overhead. 2 flawed people who'd found each other through desperation and deception and chose to build something honest from the wreckage. The foundation wasn't perfect, but it was strong, built brick by brick through showing up and doing the work and refusing to give up even when everything was broken. Sometimes the greatest wealth was knowing exactly how rich you were, and measured in love earned rather than inherited, in lives built together rather than apart. Marcus and Emma Drake had everything.